Hi, my name's David, and along with my wife Sarah and our 4 children, we are International Mission Board missionaries serving here in Bogota, Colombia. When Pastor Trent asked me to talk a little bit about neighboring and how neighboring is a part of our ministry here in Bogota, I immediately thought of the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, verses 27 through 35. You see, the story goes that there was this man who was robbed and beaten and left for dead. And a priest comes by and walks by on one side, and a Levite comes by and walks by on the other side. And then there's this Good Samaritan who comes and he stops and he begins to mend the wounds of this man who had been beaten. And he spends his time and his talent and his treasure making sure this man is set on a path of healing. You know, oftentimes when we think about the Great Commission, think about mission, we think about evangelism. And certainly evangelism is a big part of the Great Commission. But what if neighboring was also a big part of the Great Commission? You know, Jesus thought neighboring was important. In the verses just above this story, he gives the 2 greatest commandments. Jesus says to love the Lord our God with all of our heart and with all of our soul and with all of our strength and with all of our mind, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. So what does it mean to love your neighbor? At the very end of this story, the question was asked, who was a neighbor to this man? Well, obviously it was the Good Samaritan. Oftentimes we think about neighbor as a noun, as someone who lives across the street from me or someone who lives beside me. But neighboring is a verb. The person who was a neighbor, the Good Samaritan, stops and he spends his time and talent and treasure and he cares for. He goes into action. And that's what we desire to do here in Bogota, is to love people well, to put people before ourselves so that we can gain a hearing for the gospel. You know, last night we had a neighbor knock on our door, and he asked that we would pray for his family. He asked that we would pray for his father-in-law. His father-in-law had just had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. We had the opportunity to pray and care for them, and we continue to do so. But a year and a half ago, they were very close to the gospel, very close to talking about Christ. But here we are a year and a half later, and they're knocking on our door asking for prayer. Why is that? It's because we've neighbored, we've pursued them, we've loved them, we cared for them. And so my wife and our kids have been neighboring well for the last 6 months of quarantine here in our apartment complex. And she's going to share a little bit about what neighboring looks like here in Bogota.
When we moved to Colombia just over 2 years ago, we couldn't wait to meet our neighbors and build relationships and begin to share the hope we have in Jesus. However, due to the busy pace of the large city where we live, people just weren't home and they had very busy, demanding schedules. And then with COVID-19, everyone was home all day, every day, and we began to pray, Lord, how could we reach our neighbors? How can we bless them? How can we encourage them? How can we share your good news? And God gave us this idea to have all the children make homemade cards. And one day we went all through our 13-floor apartment building, and we put little cards on every door inside with a scripture and a handwritten note letting our neighbors know that our family was praying for them and for their family. And oh my goodness, what joy we had when we started receiving notes in return, and our neighbors received that small act so warmly. And so for the following 6 months of our strict quarantine, every week to 2 weeks, we would put something new on their door. We decorated the elevator. We decorated the stairwell of our building multiple times, actually. And the Lord used all of it. And before we knew it, we would have knocks on our door, and neighbors came to introduce themselves. They wanted to meet our children. They wanted to say thank you. They wanted to bring us treats in return. And it was just such a precious season, even though it was very strange and very unusual and completely unplanned. But God used all of it. And we're just so thankful for the opportunity now to say we know all the neighbors in our building.